will try to remedy the situation by triggering the P53 protein response. So the P53 protein will detect that the cell is undergoing DNA damage. So it will arrest the cell in the G1 phase of the cell cycle. It is the G1 phase is the phase where the cell cycle repairs itself before it undergoes replication in the next stage, which is mitosis. Now, P53 will arrest the cell cycle in the G1 phase to see if the repair machinery of the cell will be able to repair the DNA damage caused by the reactive oxidative species. If the repair system of the cell is able to repair this nuclear DNA, then the P53 will allow the cell to progress and move on into the next phase. Otherwise, if the P53 realizes that the damage of the reactive oxidative species is overwhelming, then it will induce apoptosis. In the cancer cells, many cancer cells, P53 is mutated or inactive. So that means the destroyed and damaged and mutated DNA caused by the reactive oxidative species will build up and can even transform and become neoplastic, and there is no P53 to detect that the cell cycle needs to be arrested until this situation is repaired. And that's why neoplasia can go on, because there is no P53 to remedy the situation caused by this reactive oxidative species. So we see reactive oxidative species is very involved in lipid peroxidation, destroying the plasma membrane, in protein cross-linking, breakdown and misfolding, and in DNA damage. So now, lastly, we should now be able to determine which stressor is able to cause cell damage in which way and cause cell death in either apoptosis or necrosis. So let's take a physical agent as a stressor. What's an example of physical agent? Ultraviolet radiation, electric shock, or trauma, or a physical trauma. Now, this physical trauma, this ultraviolet radiation, what can it do? Ultraviolet radiation can cause ultraviolet radiation, ionizing radiation can split water into reactive oxidative species known as the hydroxyl and the hydrogen free radicals, and they will become reactive oxidative species, and they will cause lipid peroxidation, protein misfolding, DNA damage, death by apoptosis. What will ultraviolet radiation do? It will also cause reactive oxidative species and death by apoptosis. Trauma will cause necrotic death because there is a traumatic destruction of the lipid membrane, of the structural integrity of the lipid membrane, leading to leakage of the content of the cell and causing death by necrosis. Let's move on to chemical agent. How about a corrosive detergent? A corrosive detergent causes death by necrosis and eliciting acute inflammation. What about toxins? Well, it depends on what kind of toxin. Toxins are poisonous, harmful substances caused in the living system or by the living by living organisms. Well, carbon monoxide is an example of a toxin, and potassium cyanide is another form of a toxin, and ethanol, that is the major substance in alcoholic recreational drinks, and there's also drugs and there's cigarette smoke. So cigarette, for example, cigarette smoking, what does it do? Cigarette smoking, in the case of someone who's smoking a cigarette, this smoke will start reacting in the larynx. So the larynx is full of cells known as ciliated columnar epithelial cells. But this cigarette smoke will lead to their metaplasia, and they're changing from being ciliated columnar epithelial cells, they will become stratified squamous epithelial cells. And stratified squamous epithelial cells, they are stronger cells that are able to adapt better to the nicotine smoke. However, they will deprive the person from all the advantages of having a ciliated mucus secreting cells known as the ciliated columnar epithelial cells, and it doesn't end there. This metaplasia can advance to becoming neoplasia and cancer. Potassium cyanide can cause is a toxin that can cause cell death by blocking a protein called cytochrome C, which is involved in oxidative phosphorylation. So now oxidative phosphorylation is impaired by this toxin cyanide, potassium cyanide, leading to diminished and sudden stop in the production of ATP and leads to death by necrosis. So this toxin leads to death by necrosis. There are necrotic toxins also released by bacteria, bacterial endotoxins that cause necrotic death. So some toxins cause necrotic death, and others can cause can cause the generation of reactive oxidative species. And we see, you see, which stressors does what? Does it cause trauma? Does it stop does the stressors stop the oxidative phosphorylation? That means it will cause death by necrosis. Does it cause the release of toxin? The toxin will damage the mitochondria, leading to the generation of reactive oxidative species. Reactive oxidative species kill the cell by apoptosis, but they also cause lipid peroxidation through causing lipid peroxidation, protein cross-linking, and DNA damage. There's also infectious agents, depending on which agent are we looking at. Are we looking at a viral infection, or are we looking at a bacterial infection, parasitic infection, worm infection, or fungal infection? Let's rapidly compare bacterial infection to viral infection. Well, the viral replicates inside the cell. The bacteria doesn't replicate inside the cell. The bacteria releases a toxin that binds the cell, and binds a particular membrane transport protein, or causes a deficiency or disability in the structural integrity of the plasma membrane, leading to cell death by apoptosis. While a virus can lead to cell death if detected. Once entering the cell, it can lead to cell death by apoptosis, and can also lead to cell death by necrosis. And some bacteria will lead to cell death by apoptosis if they bind to structural components through their toxins, or if they can release toxins that can cause necrotic death. Okay, let's look at nutritional imbalance. Imbalance meaning deficiency in nutrition, or like there is hypercholesterolemia, someone who isn't watching what they eat, including myself. These people will end up, unfortunately, developing acetylsclerosis and leading to atherosclerosis and leading to ischemia and angina, and obesity being a risk factor for many chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension. We also have deficiency, we didn't say nutritional deficiency, we did nutritional imbalance. So too much sugar, too much carbohydrates, and too much fats, too much proteins can lead to obesity, which is a risk factor for many chronic diseases, and a deficiency in carbohydrate supply leads to an inability to generate required ATP, and a deficiency in this malnutrition or malnourishment or no supply of the proper amino acid and vitamins leads to cell injury and death by death of cells by apoptosis, or leading to inflammation and clinical manifestations. And there's also another form is immunologic reactions, as in the case of autoimmune disease. In autoimmune disease, the immune system suffers from amnesia, where the immune system can no longer differentiate between self and non-self. The immune system ends up targeting its own cells, as in the case of diabetes type 1. So in diabetes type 1, the immune system targets the beta cells of the pancreas, leading to a crisis that is caused by the immune system itself, and due to its inability to differentiate between self and non-self. There is another form of immunologic reaction, such as allergy, which is a hypersensitive immunologic reaction to a non-harmful environmental substance that the immune system recognizes as very harmful. And another example is overt inflammation or chronic inflammation in certain situations where there is a major inflammation. And last but not least, there is the concept of cell aging. And in cell aging, we see death by apoptosis. You see, over the years, and we'll end with this, over the years, there is an accumulation of damaged DNA. There's an accumulation of metabolic waste and toxins. And there is also a concept of replicative senescence. So we have in our chromosomes, at the end of the chromosomes, there is a non-coding, but however is duplicated during replication. This end and terminal sequence is called a telomere. It is this telomere at the end of our chromosomes is very similar to the plastic pieces in the end of the shoelaces. They protect the shoelaces from deterioration. And same thing during the process of replication, these telomeres protect the ends of the chromosomes from degradation. However, with each round of replication, they get shorter. They get shorter. They get shorter until they are completely obliterated. When they are completely obliterated, the cell will be arrested, and it can no longer participate in replication. And this is called replicative senescence. And over the years, the machinery responsible for a DNA repair is not working as efficiently as possible. And we will talk about all of these injurious causes later on in separate sessions and videos. But for now, we should just appreciate very quickly that we have homeostasis, the normal state of the cell's optimal, the form in which the cell the form in which the cell exists. The cell is under constant stress, either caused by internal perturbations like DNA damage or autoimmune reactions or stressors inside of the cell or stressors from outside of the cell. Sometimes the adaptive capabilities of the cell succeed in resisting and warding them off and coping with these stressors, and the cell maintains homeostasis. But sometimes stressors, due to their duration and due to their sudden onset or their intensity, can overwhelm the adaptive capabilities of the cell and cause cell injury, and then the cell will continue trying to perform compensatory adaptations. Sometimes the cell succeeds to reverse the injury and become homeostatic, but other times, depending on factors, it will become irreversible. And there is two types of cell death: apoptosis cell death. There's apoptotic cell death.